Tonight, we explore the lives and legacies of the most notorious women in Roman history, the kind of women who shattered reputations, schemed their way into power, and left behind a trail of betrayal, murder, and scandal. From poisoning emperors to seducing generals and masterminding civil wars, these women weren't just dangerous, they were unforgettable. So before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if you enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are way too interesting and we're still working on the boring ones. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some background noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight, together. The mother who made a monster. Agrippina the Younger was born into the very heart of Roman power. The daughter of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder and the sister of Emperor Caligula, but power in ancient Rome was never inherited peacefully. It was earned, manipulated, sometimes poisoned for. From the moment she entered public life, Agrippina played the long game. She was exiled in her early years, a reminder that even women of the imperial family were disposable. But when Caligula was murdered and her uncle Claudius took the throne, Agrippina saw her opportunity. She seduced Claudius, her own uncle, and married him, becoming Empress of Rome. But she didn't want to be a consort. She wanted to rule. Agrippina's son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the boy history would remember as Nero, became her obsession. She orchestrated his adoption by Claudius, slowly elevating him above Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Every move was calculated, every ally carefully chosen. She had coins minted with her image beside the emperor's, something unheard of for a woman in Rome. And then, when Nero's place was secure, Claudius died. The official story was that he passed from illness. The whispered truth? Agrippina served him a dish of poisoned mushrooms, his favorite. Nero was crowned emperor at just 16, and at first, Agrippina ruled through him. She sat beside him in public, read his correspondence, met with senators. But Nero, like many sons of powerful mothers, began to resent her grip. He stripped her of her titles, removed her guards, even moved her to a separate residence. But Agrippina wasn't easy to eliminate. Nero tried to kill her with a collapsing boat, a trap that failed when she swam ashore. Finally, he ordered her assassination outright. She was stabbed to death in her villa. They say her final words were chilling. When the assassin raised his blade, she bared her stomach and said, "Strike here, for this bore Nero." Agrippina's life wasn't just a tale of ambition, it was a warning. In Rome, even the most powerful women lived on borrowed time, and those who created emperors often met their end at the hands of the very monsters they made. Chapter 2. Messalina, the Empress of Excess. Valeria. Messalina married the Emperor Claudius when she was still a teenager. On the surface, she was everything an empress was expected to be. Beautiful, young, of noble blood. But beneath that image, Rome whispered about her true nature, and the whispers didn't stay whispers for long. Messalina's name became synonymous with scandal. In a society that valued modesty, at least in theory, she was an open flame in a room full of oil lamps. While Claudius, a bookish and awkward man, buried himself in administrative work, Messalina turned the palace into her playground. She used her position not just for comfort, but for control. Senators, nobles, even military officers found themselves in her orbit, and sometimes in her bed. Those who pleased her were rewarded with promotion. Those who crossed her disappeared. But what truly shocked Rome wasn't just her affairs. It was the scale, the audacity, the hunger. One story, perhaps apocryphal but widely believed, tells of a competition between Messalina and a leading courtesan to see who could sleep with more men in a single night. Messalina reportedly won and kept going even after the other woman gave up. But lust was only part of her danger. She was politically ambitious, eliminating rivals with false accusations and executions. She wanted more than pleasure. She wanted permanence. And then she went too far. While Claudius was away, Messalina married her lover, the consul Gaius Silius, in a public ceremony. Some say it was a mock wedding, others say it was a coup. But whether it was symbolic or real, it was treason. An empress couldn't marry another man while the emperor still lived. The news reached Claudius. At first, he didn't believe it. How could the mother of his children betray him so brazenly? But the evidence was undeniable. Messalina was executed without trial, hiding in the gardens of the palace. When the soldiers came, she begged, but even her beauty and tears couldn't save her now. She died young, barely in her 20s. Rome never forgot Messalina. To some, she was a symbol of ultimate feminine corruption, the empress who let desire drown duty. But maybe she was just a woman who wanted more than Rome was willing to give. Chapter 3. Fulvia, the woman who went to war before Livia, before Agrippina. There was Fulvia, the woman who refused to sit quietly while the Republic burned. Born into a wealthy and influential Roman family, Fulvia's path should have followed the typical arc of noble women in the late Republic: marriage, children, silence. But Fulvia was no ornament. She was a weapon. Her first two husbands, Clodius Pulcher and Gaius Scribonius Curio, were fiery populists, men who stirred crowds and challenged the elite. Both died violently, caught in the chaos of Roman politics. But Fulvia wasn't left grieving in silence. She stepped forward, taking control of their political legacies and, by extension, their mobs. Then came her third and most famous husband, Mark Antony. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, the Republic fractured into pieces. Fulvia stood at Antony's side, not as a passive wife, but as a strategic partner. She handled correspondence, managed political alliances, and when Antony left for the east, Fulvia did the unthinkable. She raised an army in his name. That's right. In a world where women couldn't even vote, Fulvia declared war. Her enemy? Octavian, the rising young heir of Caesar, who was threatening Antony's power and humiliating him publicly. Fulvia saw Octavian not just as a political rival, but a personal one. She believed he was tearing her husband's legacy apart. With Lucius Antonius, Antony's brother, Fulvia took up arms in what became known as the Perusine War. They seized cities, rallied soldiers, and occupied Perusia. For months, Fulvia resisted Octavian's siege. Supplies ran low, the people starved, but she held on. Eventually, the city fell. Octavian spared her life, barely. She fled to Greece, where she finally met Antony again. But instead of gratitude, she found distance. Antony blamed her for the war, for the fallout, for nearly destroying their cause. She died shortly after, alone and politically ruined. Was she overambitious? Certainly. But Fulvia wasn't driven by vanity. She was driven by loyalty. Her downfall came not because she overreached, but because she dared to reach at all. Fulvia remains one of the only women in Roman history to command troops in open rebellion, and for a brief, brilliant moment, she didn't just influence Rome, she tried to rule it. Chapter 4. Julia the Elder. The princess who broke every rule. Julia the Elder was born into destiny. She was the only biological child of Augustus, the man who turned the crumbling Roman Republic into an empire. Her birth was not just celebrated, it was political. A symbol of a new Rome, reborn under one man's vision. And so, from the moment she could speak, Julia was raised not as a daughter, but as a piece on a chessboard. Augustus had strict plans for her. He passed moral reforms to restore traditional Roman values, laws against adultery, extravagance, and scandal. And to reinforce those values, he offered up his own daughter as the model Roman woman, beautiful, educated, dutiful. But Julia wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol. She was married off repeatedly for political reasons, first to Marcellus, then to Marcus Agrippa, and finally to Tiberius. Each marriage served Augustus's ambitions, but none served Julia's heart. So she rebelled, not with swords, but with scandal. She surrounded herself with poets, thinkers, and lovers. Her nights became legendary. The daughter of the emperor was seen at wild parties, quoting Virgil one moment, and seducing senators the next. Her lovers weren't just common men. They were the sons of Rome's elite, and she wasn't subtle. Some said she made love on the very steps of the Forum, mocking the very laws her father had passed. Others whispered she was forming a secret faction, with men more loyal to her than to Rome itself. Eventually, Augustus had no choice. His legacy, his laws, his image, all were threatened. And so, he did what no father wants to do. He exiled his own daughter. Julia was sent to a desolate island, Pandateria, windswept and barren. No visitors, no letters, no wine. Her sons were taken from her. Her name erased from coins and monuments. Once the jewel of Rome, Julia became a ghost. She lived out her final years in quiet disgrace, eventually dying of malnutrition and heartbreak. Augustus never forgave her, and Rome never quite forgot. Julia's story isn't just a tale of excess, it's a tragedy of control. A woman born into power but never allowed to wield it. A daughter sacrificed to maintain the illusion of order. And a reminder that even princesses are prisoners in the empire of men. Chapter 5. Livia Drusilla, the empress who ruled from the shadows. Before there was Agrippina, before Julia and Messalina, there was Livia. Livia Drusilla was the blueprint, the original empress, the quiet thunder behind the throne of Rome. She married Augustus, not when he was emperor, but when he was still Octavian, still clawing his way to absolute power. The union was swift, strategic, and scandalous. She was already married and pregnant by another man when Octavian took her as his wife, but none of that mattered. Livia became the first lady of Rome, poised, elegant, untouchable. To the public, she was the perfect Roman matron. Modest in dress, loyal in speech, generous in charity, coins bore her image, not as a goddess or seductress, but as the mother of the nation. She embodied virtue. But behind that image was a far more cunning presence. Livia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What she whispered in Augustus's ear carried more weight than a senator's decree. And as the years went by, her influence only grew, especially over succession. She had no children with Augustus, but she had a son from her first marriage, Tiberius. And one by one, all of Augustus's other potential heirs began to fall, some from illness, others from accidents. But Rome has always believed. Livia's fingerprints were on more than just family portraits. Marcellus, Agrippa Posthumus, Gaius, and Lucius Caesar all died mysteriously, young and full of promise. Convenient, some thought, suspicious, others whispered. But Livia remained untouched. When Augustus finally died, possibly after eating a few too many fresh figs, which some suspected had been coated in poison, it was Tiberius who took the throne. Her son, her blood, her plan. And Livia wasn't done. She took the name Julia Augusta and was granted honors reserved only for gods and emperors. Even after Augustus's death she ruled, now as the empress mother, the silent architect behind the imperial machinery. But Tiberius resented her. He saw her not as a mother, but as a manipulator. In his later years, he fled Rome and refused to even attend her funeral. Livia's life was a masterclass in restraint, patience, and power. She didn't need armies, she didn't need spectacle, she just needed time and everyone else to underestimate her. Chapter 6. Lucilla, the sister who tried to kill an emperor. Lucilla was born into the purple, the daughter of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and sister to one of the most infamous emperors in Roman history, Commodus. If Marcus Aurelius was Rome's philosopher-king, then Commodus was its nightmare. Narcissistic, theatrical, and violent, he treated the empire like his personal playground. Gladiator games, public executions, statues of himself as Hercules. Rome had seen mad emperors before, but none quite like him. Lucilla watched all of this unfold with quiet horror. She had been raised to understand power and how to wield it. As a child, she was married to Lucius Verus, co-emperor with her father. She wore the title Augusta, Empress of Rome, before she was even 20. But after Verus died, Lucilla lost her crown and her position. All while Commodus rose, she was no longer at the center of the empire. She was now on the outside, watching as her reckless brother dragged Rome into chaos. And then she decided to act. In 182 AD, Lucilla became part of a plot. Alongside a small group of senators and family allies, she planned to assassinate Commodus and restore order to Rome. It wasn't idealism, it was survival. Commodus was paranoid, vengeful. Her family was in danger. But the plan fell apart almost immediately. The chosen assassin confronted Commodus too soon, in public, in broad daylight. The emperor dodged the attack. Guards swarmed. The conspirators were captured. Lucilla tried to distance herself, deny her involvement. But Rome had no room for mercy, especially not under a furious Commodus. She was exiled to Capri, a beautiful island, but also a prison. And not long after, the order came. Commodus couldn't allow her to live. She was executed quietly, far from the noise of the city she had once ruled. History remembers Lucilla not for her grace or nobility, but for her treason. Yet treason is a matter of perspective. Was she a traitor, or was she the only one who saw the monster for what he was? Lucilla may have failed, but she was among the first to try and stop Commodus, before Rome lost itself to madness. Chapter 7. Poppaea Sabina, the beauty who ruled Nero's heart. Poppaea Sabina was known across Rome for one thing above all else: beauty. Flawless skin, golden hair, a soft voice, and the grace of a goddess. But Poppaea wasn't just admired, she was dangerous. Born into wealth and high status, Poppaea had charm. But more importantly, she had ambition. Her first marriage was to a man of influence, but she soon set her sights higher, much higher. Her ascent began as a mistress, first to the future Emperor Otho, then to Emperor Nero himself. But being Nero's mistress wasn't enough. Poppaea wanted a crown, and she would get it. The problem? Nero was already married to Claudia Octavia, daughter of the former Emperor Claudius. Octavia was noble, quiet, and beloved by the Roman people. But she was no match for Poppaea. Poppaea whispered in Nero's ear. She complained of Octavia's coldness, her infertility, her lack of love. She suggested Octavia was disloyal, that she was unworthy of being empress. Eventually, Nero gave in. Octavia was divorced, then exiled, but the people rioted in protest. So Nero did what Nero always did. He took it further. Octavia was executed, her head sent to Poppaea as proof. Now crowned empress, Poppaea was unstoppable. She bathed in milk, wore pearls the size of olives, and kept legions of servants to maintain her beauty. But behind that elegance was cold calculation. She silenced rivals, rewarded loyalists, and had her enemies crushed. Not loudly, but with a smile. But even Poppaea couldn't control Nero's volatility forever. In 65 AD, while pregnant with their second child, Poppaea and Nero got into an argument. No one knows exactly what it was about. Some say she scolded him for coming home late. Others believe she made the mistake of pushing him too far, too fast. In a fit of rage, Nero struck her. A single kick to her abdomen. She collapsed. Hours later, both she and the unborn child were dead. Even Nero wept. He mourned her in elaborate ceremonies, built temples in her honor, and even mummified her body, something unheard of in Roman tradition. But no amount of grief could bring her back. Poppaea Sabina had seduced an emperor, ruled an empire, and died as suddenly as she rose. In Rome, beauty opened every door, but it never guaranteed a way out. Chapter 8. Domitia Longina, the empress who survived a tyrant. Domitia Longina was not supposed to be an empress. She came from noble blood, the daughter of a famous general and granddaughter of a consul. But her early life was typical for women of her class. Quiet, arranged marriage, social status. Nothing more. But fate brought her into the orbit of one of Rome's most unpredictable emperors, Domitian. He was cold, calculating, insecure, and absolutely obsessed with control. When they married, he was not yet emperor, but even then Domitia saw something others didn't. She saw ambition, and she tied herself to it. When Domitian took the purple, Domitia became empress. She stood at his side, smiled at the ceremonies, and bore him a son, an heir, though the child died young. Their union wasn't marked by love, but by strategy. She knew her place, and how to stay in it. But even loyalty couldn't protect her from Domitian's moods. Rumors spread that Domitia had taken a lover, the famed actor Paris. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Domitian, jealous and paranoid, ordered Paris murdered in the street. Blood splattered across the theatre steps. Domitia was banished shortly after, sent away in disgrace, the empress cast out. But she didn't stay gone. Within a year, she returned. Why? Some say it was for politics, others say Domitian missed her, or perhaps he simply wanted a familiar face in a court full of snakes. Either way, Domitia resumed her role, cold and silent, beside the man who had tried to erase her. She endured his reign of terror. She watched him execute senators, exile nobles, and call himself a living god. And when whispers of conspiracy began to circle, when plots moved in shadowed corners, Domitia said nothing. And then, in 96 AD, Domitian was stabbed to death in his own palace. Some believe Domitia was part of the plot. Others say she knew and let it happen. What's certain is this: she survived. While others fell, Domitia walked away, rich, untouched, and respected. For a woman in ancient Rome, that wasn't just survival, that was mastery. Chapter 9. Julia Domna, the philosopher empress with a ruthless edge. Julia Domna came from the distant city of Emesa in Syria, a place of sun, temples, and gods older than Rome itself. She wasn't Roman by birth, but she would become one of the most powerful women in Roman history. When she married Septimius Severus, a rising general from North Africa, no one imagined that their union would soon sit at the very top of the Roman world. But in 193 AD, Severus claimed the throne by force, beginning a new dynasty, and Julia became empress, and not just in name. Unlike many women before her, Julia took an active role in imperial life. She traveled with her husband on military campaigns. She sat in on strategy sessions. She advised him on law, governance, and alliances. While most empresses stayed in the shadows, Julia was by his side. Always. She surrounded herself with philosophers and intellectuals. Her court became a center of learning. Poets, mathematicians, historians, all gathered around her. She was called Mater Castorum, mother of the camp, and Mater Senatus et Patriae, mother of the Senate and the fatherland. But for all her wisdom, Julia had a dark streak. After Severus died, their two sons, Caracalla and Geta, inherited the empire. Julia tried to keep the peace. She begged them to rule jointly, to avoid bloodshed. But peace was not in Caracalla's nature. Less than a year later, Caracalla had Geta murdered in Julia's arms. It's said her son's blood splashed across her dress. She said nothing, and from that moment on, Julia Domna ruled once more, but now through Caracalla. He trusted no one except her. But his reign was brutal, and when Caracalla was finally assassinated on the road to a military campaign, Julia was left exposed. She had lost her sons, her husband, and the illusion of control. Rather than be cast aside, Julia chose her own ending. She stopped eating, locked herself away, and died of starvation, still wearing the robes of an empress. Julia Domna was a philosopher, a mother, a strategist, and a woman who held the empire together with poise and silence. Even in grief, she remained composed. Even in death, she kept her dignity. Chapter 10. Julia Maesa, the grandmother who made emperors. Julia Maesa was not a woman of war, not in the traditional sense. She didn't command armies on horseback. She didn't carry a sword, but she may have been one of the most dangerous women the Roman Empire ever produced. She was the sister of Julia Domna, the empress of Septimius Severus, and like her sister, Julia Maesa came from Emesa, a powerful Syrian city whose priest-kings traced their lineage to the sun god Elagabal. She was rich, sharp, and quietly watching the throne, even after it slipped from her family's grasp. When her nephew, Emperor Caracalla, was assassinated, the Severan dynasty seemed finished. The new ruler, Macrinus, had no imperial blood, just a military pedigree. Maisa, now in her 60s, was exiled from court, along with her daughter and grandsons. But Maisa wasn't done. Back in Syria, she spread a rumor. Her 14-year-old grandson, Elagabalus, was not only Caracalla's illegitimate son, but the rightful heir to Rome. The Eastern legions believed her, or perhaps they wanted to. Either way, they declared young Elagabalus emperor, and Maisa funded the rebellion with her own fortune. In 218 AD, her gamble paid off. Macrinus was defeated. Elagabalus became emperor, a teenager controlled by his grandmother. At first, Maisa was hailed as a savior of the dynasty. She sat in the Senate chamber, a right no woman had ever held. She wielded enormous power behind the curtain. But Elagabalus was a problem. He was more priest than emperor. He introduced foreign gods, married multiple times, including a Vestal Virgin, and shocked Rome with wild, chaotic behavior. Maisa, ever calculating, saw the danger. So she made a brutal choice. She abandoned him and turned to her younger grandson, Severus Alexander, a quiet, obedient boy. In 222, Maisa helped orchestrate Elagabalus's assassination, along with his mother, Julia Soaemias. Both were dragged through the streets and dumped in the Tiber River. Rome moved on, and Maisa remained. She had made not one, but 2 emperors, and when she died, she was honored as Augusta, empress in all but title. Julia Maisa never wore a crown, but for nearly a decade she ruled Rome from behind the veil, with coin, cunning, and the cold patience of a grandmother who knew exactly what she wanted. Chapter 11. Julia Soaemias, the mother of madness. Julia Soaemias was born into ambition. Her mother, Julia Maisa, was a master of power. Her aunt, Julia Domna, had once ruled Rome beside Septimius Severus. And when Soaemias gave birth to a son, Elagabalus, she wasn't just raising a child. She was raising a future emperor. After Caracalla's death and her family's fall from grace, Soaemias followed her mother into exile. But in the shadows, a plan was forming. Her son was just a teenager, a priest of the sun god Elagabal in their native Syria. But Maisa saw an opportunity, and Soaemias seized it. Together, they claimed that Elagabalus was the illegitimate son of Caracalla and the true heir to Rome. It was a lie, a clever one. Soaemias and Maisa rallied the Eastern legions, promising glory, gold, and divine favor. The soldiers declared for Elagabalus, and by 218 AD, the boy emperor, just 14, marched into Rome with his mother at his side. Soaemias was not just the emperor's mother. She was the power behind the throne. She held the title Augusta. Her name appeared on coins. She attended Senate meetings, something unheard of for a woman. She held her own court, issued orders, and made decisions. But what she protected was chaos. Her son was unpredictable. He tried to replace Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods, with Elagabal, his eastern deity. He danced in priestly robes, married multiple women and men. He held public rituals that scandalized even the most liberal Romans. Soaemias didn't stop him, she encouraged him. She shielded him from criticism, dismissed advisors who warned of unrest, and tightened her grip on power as her son's rule unraveled. Eventually, even Maisa had enough. Fearing a revolt, she shifted her support to her younger grandson, Severus Alexander. And Soaemias, she stood her ground, loyal to her son to the very end. In 222 AD, the Praetorian Guard stormed the palace. Elagabalus and Soaemias were slaughtered. Their bodies were dragged through the streets and dumped into the Tiber. No honor, no funeral, no memory, at least not the kind they wanted. Julia Soaemias gambled everything on her son's divinity. But in Rome, gods are made and unmade by the sword. She ruled through a boy who thought he was a god, and died a mother of a fallen empire. Chapter 12. Julia Mamaea, the matriarch who ruled through her son. Julia Mamaea was the final link in a powerful chain, the last of the Severan women who ruled Rome not from thrones, but from behind them. She was the daughter of Julia Maesa and the younger sister of Julius Oemius. While her sister was swept away in the chaos of Elagabalus' madness, Mamaea watched quietly, carefully, waiting. Her son, Severus Alexander, was everything Elagabalus was not: calm, thoughtful, studious, a perfect puppet for a woman like Mamaea. After the violent fall of Elagabalus and Soemias in 222 AD, the Praetorian Guard turned to Mamaea's son, a boy just 13 years old. The Senate confirmed him. Rome sighed in relief, and Mamaea stepped into power. She was never crowned empress, but she ruled nonetheless. Mamaea controlled the imperial court with icy efficiency. She surrounded her son with scholars and advisors. She dictated policy, approved decrees, and blocked access to the boy emperor. If anyone wanted to speak to him, they went through her first. She revived Rome's battered institutions, brought back traditional Roman values, and restored dignity to the empire after years of excess. But there was a price. Mamaea was distant, cold, obsessed with control. Senators feared her, generals resented her, and even her own son began to chafe under her dominance. She micromanaged everything, including his personal life. When Severus Alexander married, Mamaea clashed bitterly with his wife, driving her away. She couldn't share power, not even with her daughter-in-law. Still, the empire limped forward, until it met the Germanic frontier. In 235 AD, a massive uprising required the emperor's presence. Mamaea joined him on campaign. Even there, she refused to let go. She handled negotiations, dismissed experienced commanders, and stalled action in favor of diplomacy. The soldiers had had enough. They wanted action. They wanted war, and they wanted a leader who didn't need his mother to speak for him. The Praetorian Guard mutinied. Mamaea and her son were murdered in their tent, betrayed by their own troops. Their bodies, once symbols of order, were left abandoned in the mud. Julia Mamaea died as she lived, at the center of power, clutching control until it was torn from her hands. She was the last of the great Severan women, and with her fall came the collapse of everything they built. Chapter 13, Faustina the Younger, the Empress who loved danger. Faustina the Younger was born into royalty, the daughter of Emperor Antoninus Pius, and the wife of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor. From the outside, she was the ideal Roman woman, noble, graceful, and a mother to many. But behind that polished image, Faustina carried a reputation that made the Roman elite whisper. She was said to be passionate, dangerously so. While her husband meditated on virtue and Stoic philosophy, Faustina was rumored to be stirring chaos in the background. Ancient sources claimed she had numerous affairs, some with soldiers, some with actors, even gladiators, the lowest of the low in Roman society. Whether true or not, the gossip stuck. The image of an empress with a taste for power and danger captivated the imagination of Rome. And it wasn't just about affairs. Faustina was involved in plots, promotions, and palace intrigues. Her influence over Marcus Aurelius was quiet, but undeniable. Some believed she had a say in appointments to key military positions. Others accused her of having enemies removed from court altogether. One of the most dramatic stories surrounding her came during the revolt of Avidius Cassius. Cassius, a general in the east, declared himself emperor in 175 AD, claiming falsely that Marcus Aurelius was dead. And who supported him? Some ancient writers suggest Faustina. It was whispered she had grown tired of her aging philosopher husband and saw Cassius, young, powerful, admired, as a better future. Whether she truly betrayed Marcus is unknown, but the accusation was enough to stain her image. Marcus, ever calm, crushed the rebellion. He never publicly condemned Faustina. In fact, he defended her reputation until the end. But even he couldn't save her from fate. While traveling with the army in the east, Faustina fell ill and died suddenly in 175 AD. She was in her early 40s. Her death devastated Marcus, who had her deified, turned into a goddess. Temples were built in her honor, coins minted in her name. To the empire, she became Faustina Augusta. To historians, she remains an enigma. Was she a loyal empress maligned by jealous men, or a cunning operator hidden behind a soft smile? Faustina the Younger left behind 14 children, a shattered husband, and a legacy forever caught between admiration and suspicion. Chapter 14. Paulina. The wife who chose to die Paulina was not born a queen or a noble. She didn't rule an empire or start a war. In fact, she remains one of the quieter figures in Roman history. But her story is unforgettable. She was the wife of Seneca, the philosopher, playwright, and former advisor to Emperor Nero. Their marriage was one of deep respect and rare affection, something not often seen among Roman elites. Seneca, once powerful and close to the emperor, had fallen out of favor. His stoic teachings, his quiet wealth, his moral influence, they all made Nero uneasy. In 65 AD, the infamous Pisonian conspiracy sought to overthrow Nero. Whether Seneca was truly involved is unclear, but Nero saw his chance and ordered Seneca to take his own life. It was a quiet execution disguised as honor. Paulina, upon hearing the sentence, made a decision few would understand. She would die alongside her husband. In a Rome ruled by betrayal, fear, and self-preservation, Paulina's choice was both astonishing and defiant. She opened her own veins beside Seneca, determined to share in his fate. Their home became a tomb of silence, broken only by the sounds of flowing blood and whispered goodbyes. But Nero was watching, or rather, he was calculating. The death of Seneca, necessary. The death of Paulina, inconvenient. She came from a respected family. Her suicide might draw sympathy or questions. So at the last moment, Nero ordered her life to be saved. Physicians rushed in. They bandaged her wounds, forced air into her lungs, and slowly, painfully, Paulina survived. But she was never the same. The woman who emerged from that attempted death was pale, frail, and ghost-like. She bore the scars not just of the knife, but of a broken world. A Rome where love and loyalty were dangerous, where dying for someone could cost you your future and your peace. We don't know how long Paulina lived after that day. History fades around her, as it often does with women who refuse to play the role expected of them. But for a brief moment, she embodied something rare in imperial Rome. Silent courage. She didn't raise an army. She didn't poison an emperor. She just refused to let her husband die alone. Chapter 15. Calpurnia, the wife who dreamed of blood. In the final hours before the Ides of March, Calpurnia couldn't sleep. The night was restless, filled with dread and flickering visions. She dreamt of her husband, Julius Caesar, lying in her arms, bleeding, lifeless, a statue pouring with blood, cries in the dark, a warning she couldn't shake. Calpurnia wasn't a politician or a schemer. She was Caesar's third wife, married late in his life, chosen not for love but for alliance. Yet, of all the women who had come and gone in Caesar's world, Calpurnia was the one by his side when it mattered most, at the very end. She was quiet, loyal, dutiful, but not foolish. She knew what kind of man she had married, a man who had crossed the Rubicon, defied the Senate, and declared himself dictator for life. Caesar had enemies in every marble hallway of Rome. He walked among daggers disguised as smiles, and on that morning, March 15th, 44th BC, Calpurnia begged him not to go to the Senate. She pleaded, wept, told him her dreams were omens, that something terrible would happen. At first, Caesar listened. For a moment, the most powerful man in Rome, conqueror of Gaul, destroyer of Pompey, lover of Cleopatra, stayed home because his wife was afraid. But Rome does not bend to superstition, and men like Caesar do not stay hidden for long. Soon Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, arrived to coax him out. He mocked the idea of omens. laughed at the dreams, told Caesar he'd look weak if he didn't appear in public. And just like that, Caesar rose, dressed, and walked into history. Calpurnia never saw him alive again. When the news broke that her husband had been stabbed 23 times by men he called friends, Calpurnia didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply gathered his personal papers, sealed his home, and gave Mark Antony what he needed to take control. She vanished quietly after that, her presence fading from the records. No revenge, no scandal, just silence. But those final moments, the dream, the warning, the helplessness, linger forever in the story of Caesar. Calpurnia didn't need power to matter. She saw the end, and no one listened. Chapter 16, Servilia Caepionis, the mistress who knew too much. Servilia Caepionis lived at the center of one of the most dangerous storms in Roman history, and somehow survived it. She was not an empress nor a warrior. But for decades, Servilia held the attention of Rome's most powerful men, and influenced events with little more than her presence, her bloodline, and her silence. She was the half-sister of Cato the Younger, the staunch Republican who died opposing Caesar. She was the mother of Marcus Junius Brutus, the man who would plunge a dagger into Caesar's chest, and she was, for over 20 years, Julius Caesar's mistress. Their relationship was no fleeting affair. It endured through marriages, war, and shifting alliances. Caesar was obsessed with her, even gave her properties and gifts that raised eyebrows in the Senate. Some claimed he gifted her a priceless pearl. Others whispered he once offered her access to sensitive political secrets. And when Servilia walked into a room she didn't speak often, she didn't have to. She knew things. The most infamous story attached to her comes after Caesar's assassination. When Brutus and the other conspirators struck down Caesar in the Senate, many wondered, did Servilia know it was coming? The answer remains a mystery. But what we do know is chilling. It's said that Caesar once joked, during a Senate meeting, that if Brutus were plotting to kill him, he'd surely be safe, since Servilia was selling out the entire conspiracy to him already. Was it a joke? A warning? A truth he chose to ignore? Some accounts suggest Servilia tried to warn Caesar on the day of the Ides, not with dreams, like Calpurnia, but with political caution. Others say she kept quiet, torn between her lover and her son. After the assassination, Servilia did not celebrate, nor did she flee. She stayed in Rome, calmly enduring the collapse of the Republic and the rise of vengeance. When Brutus eventually died in battle, hunted down by Mark Antony and Octavian, Servilia lived on, alone, grieving, and yet untouched, as though Rome itself feared her too much to strike. Servilia's power was never official. It was quieter than that, more dangerous, because sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who says nothing and knows everything. Chapter 17, Claudia Octavia, the Empress who wasn't allowed to live. Claudia Octavia was born into the highest circles of Roman nobility. She was the daughter of Emperor Claudius and his third wife, Valeria Messalina, though her mother's legacy was one of scandal and shame. After Messalina's execution, Octavia was raised under the iron hand of her stepmother, Agrippina the Younger. Her childhood was one of tight control, public expectation, and constant danger. She was trained not to speak, but to survive. When she was just a young teenager, she was married to Nero, Agrippina's son, in a calculated move to secure his future claim to the throne. From that moment on, Octavia's life became a cage. At first, she was praised as the perfect Roman wife, modest, obedient, dignified. But that didn't matter to Nero. He had no interest in her. He sought other women, and eventually one woman in particular, Poppaea Sabina. Octavia became a symbol of everything Nero hated: tradition, restraint, and public duty. Yet the people of Rome loved her. She represented the last flicker of the Claudian line, and a connection to the respected past. Her popularity became her shield, but not forever. When Poppaea entered Nero's life, everything changed. Nero wanted to marry her, but divorce alone wouldn't be enough. Rome would not accept the humiliation of Octavia without justification. So Nero created one. He accused her of infertility, then of adultery. False witnesses were brought in to support the claim. The charges were outrageous. No one believed them. The people rioted in her defense. Statues of Poppaea were torn down, and Octavia's name was shouted in the streets. But Nero didn't back down. He had Octavia exiled to the island of Pandateria, the same place her step-grandmother, Julia the Elder, had been sent generations earlier. Alone, terrified, and stripped of her titles, Octavia awaited her fate. It came quickly. On Nero's orders, soldiers arrived and executed her. She was barely 22 years old. Her head was severed and sent to Poppaea as a grim trophy. Octavia never sought power. She never plotted, betrayed, or defied. She was simply in the way. And in Nero's Rome, that was enough to die for. Chapter 18. Scribonia, the wife who spoke back. Scribonia was the second wife of a man who would become Rome's first emperor, Octavian, later known as Augustus. And unlike the women who came after her, Scribonia didn't vanish into silence. She had already been married twice before their union, both times to prominent Roman politicians. She was older than Octavian, wiser, less easily impressed. Their marriage was political from the start, a tool to secure a crucial alliance during Rome's civil wars. And from that union came a daughter, Julia the Elder. But Scribonia was never content to play the obedient role. She had a sharp tongue and a sharp mind, and she didn't hide either. That made her inconvenient. Augustus, who built his image around control and stability, couldn't stand that. Barely a day after giving birth to their daughter, Scribonia was divorced. Augustus claimed she was too opinionated, that she had dared to speak when he wanted silence. He replaced her with Livia Drusilla, cold, poised, and perfectly submissive to his public image. Livia would become the ideal Roman matron. Scribonia, in contrast, was cast aside, but she didn't disappear. She remained close to her daughter Julia. And when Augustus forced Julia into multiple political marriages, Scribonia stood by her side. When Julia was eventually exiled for defying the emperor's strict moral laws, accused of adultery and public indecency, Scribonia went with her to the desolate island of Pandateria, a mother voluntarily choosing exile. That was Scribonia's final act of defiance. She had no throne, no title, but she had loyalty. No records describe her life after the exile. She vanishes from history as quietly as she lived, but her legacy remained. Scribonia was never glorified in statues or poems. She wasn't praised by historians. But she was a woman who refused to bend. She stood against the most powerful man in the world, not with weapons or rebellion, but with words, with presence, with refusal. And in a world where silence was safety, that made her dangerous. Sometimes, the worst thing a Roman woman could do was have her own voice. Chapter 19. Antonia Minor, the matron who raised monsters. Antonia Minor was born into a dynasty, daughter of Mark Antony and Octavia, niece of Augustus, and eventually the grandmother of an emperor. She was the glue that held the early imperial family together, and the quiet force behind generations of rulers. But her story is not one of gentle motherhood. It's one of stern silence, manipulation, and survival. She married Nero Claudius Drusus, the brother of Tiberius, and gave birth to 3 children, including one who would rise higher than anyone expected, Claudius. Yet for most of his life, Antonia saw Claudius as a disappointment. He stammered. He limped. He was sickly and awkward, more interested in reading history than playing politics. Antonia was said to have referred to him not as her son, but as a monster. She mocked him, hid him from public view. Even as emperor, he would later recall being treated as a joke by his own mother. But Antonia's cruelty wasn't limited to her son. Her granddaughter was Livilla, a woman accused of having an affair with Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard. Their alleged plot? To murder Livilla's husband, Drusus the Younger, Antonia's own son, and put Sejanus closer to the throne. When the conspiracy was uncovered, Antonia didn't weep or deny. She turned her granddaughter in. Some sources even claim she locked Livilla in a room and starved her to death. This was the kind of woman Antonia was, loyal to Rome, not to blood. When Caligula, her great-nephew, became emperor, she watched the empire plunge into madness. His excesses, his executions, his open cruelty. She tried to advise him, tried to guide him, but Caligula didn't listen. Eventually, he mocked her in public, ignored her entirely. Antonia, now an old woman, reportedly took her own life, no longer willing to watch what Rome had become. She had been the silent backbone of the Julio-Claudian line. She raised emperors, exiled traitors, and endured more family betrayal than most could stomach. Antonia Minor wasn't loved, she wasn't praised, but she was feared and respected, because in a world ruled by men, she taught them all how to survive, even if it meant turning on your own. Chapter 20. Claudia, the scandalous sister who ruined reputations. Long before Rome was ruled by emperors, when it was still a republic trembling on the edge of collapse, one woman seemed to scandalize the entire city just by walking through it. Her name was Claudia. Born into the powerful Claudii family, Claudia had wealth, education, and connections. But she didn't follow the script of a Roman noblewoman. She didn't stay hidden in private courtyards or limit her words to whispers. She stepped into the public eye, and Rome never forgot her. She married a wealthy politician, but that marriage dissolved into accusations and bitterness. From there, Claudia became infamous, known for her affairs, her parties, her poetry, and her venomous rivalries. Her enemies, especially men, accused her of everything: poisoning her husband, seducing senators, even sleeping with her own brother, the radical populist Publius Clodius Pulcher. And yet, she never apologized, never faded away. Claudia's most famous scandal came when she accused a man named Marcus Caelius Rufus, her former lover, of attempting to poison her. The trial that followed was a spectacle. Caelius was defended by none other than Cicero, Rome's most famous orator, and Cicero didn't hold back. In his speech pro Caelio, he didn't just defend his client, he attacked Claudia. He called her a seductress, a liar, a woman who lived like a prostitute in a noble's house. He painted her as dangerous, unpredictable, and morally diseased. It was character assassination dressed in rhetoric. But Claudia didn't vanish after the trial. She lived on in poems and rumors. Some believe she was the inspiration for the mysterious Lesbia in the love poems of Catullus, a woman both adored and despised, worshipped and cursed in the same breath. Who was Claudia really? A manipulator? A victim? A rebel? Maybe all of the above. She refused to be silent, refused to be respectable. And in a society where women were expected to be invisible, Claudia made herself unforgettable. She used her wit like a blade, her beauty like a weapon, and her name like a thunderclap in Roman gossip circles. Claudia didn't seek political office. She didn't need to. She destroyed reputations with a whisper. And in ancient Rome, that was often more powerful than any sword. Chapter 21. Cornelia Africana, the mother who birthed a revolution. Cornelia Africana was not scandalous. She didn't poison rivals or seduce emperors. In fact, she was praised for the very opposite: her virtue, her intellect, and her quiet strength. But beneath that modest exterior was a revolutionary soul. She was the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the general who defeated Hannibal, one of Rome's greatest heroes. Born into immense prestige, Cornelia could have lived a life of luxury and comfort. Instead, she became known for something far rarer in Roman history: her mind. She married Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, a respected statesman, and bore 12 children. Only 3 survived into adulthood, 2 sons and a daughter. And it was through those sons, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, that Cornelia would help shake the foundations of the Roman Republic. After her husband died, Cornelia refused to remarry, despite proposals, including one from the king of Egypt. She chose instead to devote herself to her children and their education. She surrounded them with Greek philosophers, historians, and thinkers. Her home became a training ground for minds, not just bodies. When a wealthy matron once mocked her for not wearing fine jewelry, Cornelia simply gestured to her sons and said, "These are my jewels." But what she raised them to become shocked Rome. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus became radical reformers. They pushed for land redistribution, grain subsidies, and the empowerment of the plebeians, the common people. Their speeches electrified the masses and enraged the elite. Tiberius was killed first, clubbed to death on the Capitoline Hill. A few years later, Gaius followed, hunted by the Senate, driven to suicide. And Cornelia, she mourned, quietly, with dignity, but she did not retreat. Instead, she wrote letters, she welcomed guests, she spoke proudly of her sons and their ideals. Her home became a museum of resistance, her words preserved in Roman memory. The elite tried to erase the Gracchi legacy, but Cornelia kept it alive. She never wielded a sword, never led a revolt. Yet through her intellect, her will, and the sons she raised, Cornelia Africana became one of the most dangerous women in Roman history because she planted an idea in the minds of Rome's future, and ideas, as we know, are harder to kill than men. Chapter 22. Marcia the Mistress Who Ended an Emperor. Marcia's story is one of love, betrayal, and ultimate vengeance. She was not born into royalty, nor did she seek power for herself. But fate and a cruel emperor gave her a chance to wield it nonetheless. She was the mistress of Emperor Commodus, the notorious ruler whose madness would be immortalized in history. Commodus was the son of Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher king, but he was nothing like his father. He was obsessed with power, vanity, and blood, a gladiator in the arena, a tyrant at court. He spent his reign indulging his whims, throwing Rome into chaos, and alienating anyone who might stand against him. But Marcia was different. She was his confidant, his lover, and for a time the only woman who seemed to have a modicum of control over him. She had the emperor's ear, and she used it to protect herself, and perhaps even to protect Rome from his growing insanity. For years, Marcia tolerated Commodus's erratic behavior. He was cruel, paranoid, and prone to violent outbursts. But their relationship was more than just one of power. Marcia loved him, or at least loved the man he could have been. But love can be fragile in a world like Rome, especially when one partner has the power to destroy the other with a single word. Commodus's paranoia grew. He began to see enemies everywhere, even among those closest to him. And Marcia, though loyal, could not escape the suspicion that his madness would eventually consume them both. In 192 AD, Commodus's reign finally reached its bloody conclusion. The Praetorian Guard, dissatisfied with his rule, conspired against him. Marcia, desperate to stop the empire from descending into further chaos, was drawn into the plot. She became the key player, the one who could end Commodus's tyranny, but it was not just duty that drove her. Marcia had come to despise the man who had once been her lover. His cruelty had broken her heart, and she knew that Rome would never be safe while he was alive. The plot succeeded. Commodus was strangled in his bath, allegedly with the help of his own lover. Marcia, though she played a critical role in the assassination, was left behind, her involvement erased from history. In the end, Marcia achieved the impossible. She ended the reign of an emperor who had brought ruin to Rome. She did so not with a sword, but with a whisper, a plot, and the quiet determination of a woman who knew that sometimes the only way to survive was to make the hardest choice of all. Chapter 23. Plautilla, the princess who was a pawn in an emperor's game. Plautilla's story is one of quiet tragedy amid the tumult of imperial Rome. Born into a noble family, she was promised a life of honor and influence. Instead, fate had a different plan, one that would make her a pawn in the cruel games of power. Her marriage was arranged when Caracalla, the notorious emperor known for his brutal disposition, was ascending in power. Unlike other women who used their wiles to maneuver through court intrigues, Plautilla was caught in a web of politics she never chose. Caracalla, who despised weakness and expected absolute submission, found her independent spirit a threat to his authority. From the start, their union was marred by tension, a loveless, forced alliance dictated by ambition rather than affection. At court, Plautilla was treated as an accessory to the emperor's glory, a symbol to be paraded before his subjects rather than as a partner in his reign. She was isolated from her family and stripped of her voice. In a world where influence was currency, she had been denied the chance to build her own fortune of ideas or alliances. Instead, her every action was watched, scrutinized, and twisted into another tool for Caracalla's propaganda. Despite this, Plautilla attempted to navigate the perilous waters of imperial favor. She reached out to trusted friends and relatives, seeking small acts of resistance, moments when her gentle intelligence could shine. But in the ruthless arena of Roman power, such efforts were seen as dangerous. The emperor's paranoia knew no bounds. His cruelty was not just reserved for his enemies. It extended to anyone who might question his authority, even indirectly. The final betrayal came swiftly. In a bitter twist of fate, Plautilla was accused of disloyalty, a charge as flimsy as it was fatal. Rumors spread that she had conspired with senators to undermine Caracalla. Whether these allegations held any truth remains lost to history. What is certain is that the emperor would allow no hint of dissent. In a dark act of retribution, Plautilla was executed. Her death was not marked by public mourning. Rather, it was another quiet disposal of a life deemed expendable. In her passing, Plautilla became a symbol of the tragic cost of power, a reminder that even those born into privilege could become nothing more than casualties in an emperor's quest for control. Her ghost, some say, still lingers in the dark corridors of Rome's imperial past. Chapter 24. Milonia Caesonia, the wife who lived in the shadow of madness. Milonia Caesonia was the final consort of Emperor Caligula, a man whose reign was as unpredictable as a lightning storm over Rome. In an era defined by excess and cruelty, Caesonia's life was intertwined with one of the most infamous emperors of all time. Little is known of her early years, but history tells us that when Caligula took notice of her, she possessed an allure that few could resist. Unlike the quiet, scheming figures that often filled the corridors of power, Caesonia was vibrant and unyielding. Her beauty was celebrated in the gossip of the courts, and her presence commanded attention in a way that both complemented and defied the emperor's own wild nature. When Caligula ascended to power, he sought partners who reflected his chaotic style. Milonia Caesonia fit the bill. She was not content to remain in the background. Instead, she embraced the tumult around her. Together they forged a notorious partnership, a blend of passion and peril that epitomized the decadence of Caligula's court. For a time, Caesonia enjoyed the lavish life of an empress. She was adorned with jewels draped in silks, and her name was etched into the annals of Roman luxury. But beneath the glitter and spectacle, the danger of the imperial world loomed large. Caligula's whims were as fickle as the wind, and his moods could shift from adoration to abhorrence in a single heartbeat. Caesonia, like many who orbited around him, risked everything simply by being associated with his erratic rule. Her fate, however, was sealed when Caligula's reign of terror came to a brutal end. In 41 AD, amidst growing discontent and conspiracies fueled by the emperor's increasing cruelty, Caligula was assassinated by members of his own guard. In the chaos that followed, Milonia Caesonia shared in the fall of an empire that had once promised her grandeur. Some accounts say she met her end alongside Caligula, while others suggest that she was targeted by those seeking to erase every trace of his mad legacy. Regardless, her death marked the final chapter of a life lived on the razor's edge, caught between the splendor of imperial favor and the deadly reality of absolute power. Milonia Caesonia remains a symbol of the perilous allure of Rome's most turbulent era, a woman whose very existence was a testament to the volatile mix of passion, power, and madness that defined her time. Chapter 25. Annia Galeria Faustina, Elder. The empress who lived in the emperor's shadow, Annia Galeria. Faustina, often known simply as Faustina the Elder, was born into an empire of contradictions. where public virtue clashed with private ambition, and the weight of family honor could both elevate and destroy. As the wife of Emperor Antoninus Pius, she walked a delicate line between personal desire and the imperial duty demanded of her every day. Faustina the Elder was celebrated for her dignified presence and for the charitable works she championed. She was a patron of arts and religion, seen as a beacon of the refined moral Roman woman. In a society where the ideal was restraint, she often found herself playing the role of the dutiful consort, quietly supporting her husband's reign and bolstering the image of an empire founded on stability and order. Yet beneath that calm exterior, whispers of scandal and intrigue sometimes circulated through the marble corridors of the imperial palace. Some ancient sources hint at secret liaisons and political maneuverings, suggesting that Faustina was far more complex than the idealized image the public was allowed to see. While she never overtly challenged the norms of her time, her presence was a constant reminder that the empire's power was as much about personal relationships as it was about political institutions. Her influence, though subtle, extended to matters of state. Faustina was known to intercede on behalf of petitioners and to offer quiet counsel during moments of crisis. Her opinions, often shared in hushed conversations behind closed doors, helped shape the compassionate image of Antoninus Pius's reign, a period later celebrated as one of relative peace and prosperity. Yet, that same compassion was double-edged. Her efforts to mediate disputes sometimes stirred jealousy among rivals and suspicion among those who preferred a more ruthless approach to power. Tragedy also touched Faustina's life. The early deaths of several of her children and the relentless pressures of court life weighed on her, casting a long shadow over her later years. Despite the honor of deification following her death, a rare tribute to a woman of her time, her legacy remains bittersweet. She was remembered as an empress who embodied the promise and pitfalls of a reign built on virtue and tempered by the relentless, unforgiving nature of imperial Rome. Annia Galeria Faustina lived quietly in the emperor's shadow, yet her life illuminates the profound complexities of power, duty, and the human heart in one of history's most storied empires. Chapter 26. Theodora, the actress who became empress. Theodora's journey from the stage to the imperial court is one of the most remarkable transformations in Roman and later Byzantine history. Born into humble origins, Theodora began her life as an actress, a role looked down upon by the upper echelons of society. Yet she possessed a rare combination of wit, charm, and unyielding determination that would ultimately defy every expectation. In a world where a woman's worth was measured by her lineage and modesty, Theodora dared to dream of power. Her beauty and intelligence drew the attention of a man who would change her destiny forever: Justinian, the ambitious general who would later become emperor. Captivated by her spirit, he chose her not for her noble birth, but for the strength and insight that shone through her every word and gesture. When Justinian ascended to the throne, Theodora was crowned his empress, a title that came with both honor and tremendous responsibility. Yet her rise to power was not without its challenges. Many in the court scorned her past, questioning her suitability for the role. But Theodora was resolute. She set about reshaping the empire's policies, fiercely advocating for reforms that would benefit the downtrodden and marginalized, particularly women and the poor. Her influence was felt in laws that improved conditions for female workers, outlawed brutal practices, and even protected children from exploitation. Theodora was more than a reformer. She was a master of court politics. With a blend of empathy and strategic acumen, she navigated the treacherous waters of power with a steady hand. When natural disasters struck or political conspiracies emerged, Theodora's counsel was sought, and her decisive actions often steered the empire away from chaos. Her dedication to justice and her courage in the face of opposition earned her not only respect, but a lasting legacy that would be remembered long after her death. Yet, even as she championed the vulnerable, Theodora remained a polarizing figure. Some admired her for the bold strides she made in an empire governed by tradition. Others condemned her, unable to reconcile the image of a former actress wielding such immense power. In the end, Theodora redefined what it meant to be a woman in power, transforming from a scorned entertainer into one of history's most influential empresses. Her story is a testament to resilience, ambition, and the transformative power of courage in the face of societal norms. Chapter 27. Helena, the saintly mother with a hidden agenda. Helena, the mother of Constantine, is often celebrated as a saint, a woman who found the true cross and paved the way for Christianity's spread. But behind the halo and pious iconography lay a woman of formidable ambition and complexity, whose influence was as far-reaching as it was controversial. Born into obscurity, Helena's rise to prominence was nothing short of meteoric. After marrying Constantius Chlorus, a modest officer in the Roman army, she bore a son who would eventually transform the empire. When her son Constantine ascended to power, Helena's own destiny shifted dramatically. No longer was she just a humble wife. She became the architect of her own legacy. Helena used her newfound position to champion the cause of Christianity. She embarked on a series of pilgrimages, searching for relics and holy sites, and is credited with the discovery of the true cross. To the devout, this was nothing less than divine intervention, a miraculous sign that her faith was justified. But behind the reverence lay a calculated ambition. Helena was determined to secure her family's place in history, and she knew that aligning herself with the rising tide of Christianity would cement her power for generations to come. Her influence extended far beyond religious matters. Helena used her wealth and connections to support charitable works, fund the construction of churches, and even influence political decisions. She was not content to be remembered solely as a saintly figure. She wanted to be seen as the guiding force behind Constantine's empire. Critics have argued that her actions, while cloaked in the guise of piety, were driven by a relentless desire for control and legacy. Helena's legacy is a tapestry of contradictions. To some, she is a paragon of virtue, her pilgrimage a symbol of spiritual awakening, her relics a testament to faith. To others, she represents the darker side of ambition, a woman who manipulated both religion and politics to serve her own ends. In a world where power was rarely shared, Helena carved out a domain of influence that defied the traditional roles prescribed to women. As the mother of the first Christian emperor, Helena's story is woven into the very fabric of Rome's transformation. But her life also serves as a reminder that even the most hallowed figures in history can possess hidden depths, and that the pursuit of power often comes with a price.